You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hello, I'm Steven Willis from the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. He is Michael Katz from the Northeast Mississippi Tupelo Daily Journal newspaper. If you're not subscribing to that newspaper, you should, even if you don't live in the market of Tupelo. If you can get your hands on it, it's really good stuff, and they provide potentially the best paper coverage that you can get on Ole Miss right now. And that is a lot due to Michael. Michael, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing fantastic because I was told after the championship games and when it came out that Ole Miss wasn't going to be excited for any bowl game that they were playing in. They were going to be playing a motivated Duke team or whoever they played in the bowl game, and that Ole Miss might be the team that was a candidate to come out flat. And I was like, okay, I mean, it makes sense based on the climate of what college football is doing. Okay. But 48 hours later, Duke is down both of their top two quarterbacks. Ole Miss has everybody opting into the ball game at this point, with the exception of maybe Micah Pettis. But it's interesting how the narrative in this game has completely changed.
Yeah, I remember initially, I think like the ESPN prediction was like 33-31 Duke. And like, I think you posted it the other day, like the description was basically like, well, Ole Miss is going to have all their opt-outs and you have no idea what team's going to show up. And that has been completely the opposite situation. It's the Duke quarterback situation is fascinating. I'm not sure what exactly has transpired there. I know they're bringing in Tulane's guy. He's supposed to be a really good player, but I don't think he's going to be available for the Gator Bowl. So yeah, I mean, Malik Murphy had a really nice year for them, 26 touchdowns, and he decides he wants to go somewhere else right after the bowl announcement. So it's there's always something right now in college football and transfer portal. It's like I just keep refreshing. I'm like, okay, like what's the next one? What's the next insane thing I'm going to see?
Well, I mean, the thing about the transfer portal is you have to be very careful. And I will give Lane Kiffin for all the crap that I give him about what he did last spring, because they were very anti-depth chart because they were afraid of the spring transfer portal window. And this is an example of why that happened, because Michael Van Buren at Mississippi State, good quarterback. He honestly looked like a freshman Matt Corral out there playing quarterback, making plays all over the place. A really good quarterback that was going to be a handful for Ole Miss to deal with for the next couple of years. Well, Mississippi State went 2-10 this year. And they had an opportunity after Jackson Arnold went into the transfer portal to kind of, in their eyes, get a name, not upgrade. Don't hear me say upgrade, but get a name of getting Oklahoma's starting quarterback with a history with Jeff Lebby. So it started going in there. They were recruiting him. I think it was either Wilt Fong or Nakos or somebody even crystal balled him to Mississippi State. And Michael Van Buren said, well, I just played my heart out for you, was the only bright spot on this football team, and you guys don't want me. I am out of here because a lot of schools will pay me a lot of money. And in my opinion, Michael, Ole Miss is having to avoid a similar trap, because we've all seen what Austin Simmons can do. Everybody else has seen what Austin Simmons can do as well. So whenever you go out looking for a quarterback, I do not think that Lane Kiffin in this environment can go get a Spencer Sanders. If this was 2022, he could not do it. So Ole Miss is kind of having to tightrope this to avoid falling into that trap that Jeff Lebby and Mississippi State did.
Yeah, I think you have to make it abundantly clear that it's a depth move and not a competition move. And I know they'll say it's always going to be competition, but Spencer Sanders was brought in to be competition for Jackson. I think that, in this new age, like if you bring in someone who's competition, not all the guys are going to stay. A lot of guys will jump ship, and it's hard to blame them. The Van Buren thing's fascinating because I thought he looked great. Some of those deep balls he threw were tremendous. I mean, the arm talent was just elite. I was like really impressed with him. And I know, like you said, Jackson Arnold is a big name. He was a huge recruit, and he's got the relationship with Lebby. But man, like, what happens if he doesn't actually end up going there?
Yeah.
Then he ran off the future, and I know Shaping's coming back, so like there's that added element. There's just a lot of weird stuff going on there. So when you thought you might have 3 quarterbacks, now you might have one who has an injury history and no future guy. It's
Kamario Taylor.
Yes.
They did sign him.
Yes. But man, Van Buren, and I mean Van Buren's a dude, and so that one was surprising, and if it doesn't end up with them with Spencer Arnold, I think I saw that the Florida State quarterback was maybe going to visit there, Kromashek or whatever his name is, and I know he's a really nice player too. But the Jackson Arnold thing seemed like for a couple of days it was like a done deal almost, and the fact that it's still in the process, it's going to be interesting to monitor that one.
Yeah, it's kind of like everybody jumped immediately on if Barry and Brown got into the transfer portal, Ole Miss would be his destination. He ended up committing to LSU. A lot of this is people connecting dots. They don't actually have any real information. They're just connecting dots and relationships and things like that. So until a visit happens on your campus, you're not getting that prospect, period. I mean, that's the way this transfer portal works. And it should be interesting. And I go to the Under Armour All-American game every single year. It's right down the road, so I get to see a lot of these prospects. So you talk about Jackson Arnold and Michael Van Buren. I saw them both work out. And when you stand out on that field, you can stand out anywhere. It's impressive. It's one of the best groups of athletes you'll ever see. Practice is 10 times more important than the game. So you're sitting out there in practice, and Jackson Arnold, he looked like a really good quarterback, but he didn't necessarily stand out on the field. You could see the talent, you could see the tools, but he didn't stand out. Michael Van Buren stood out on that practice field. He was one of the best players in Orlando that Mississippi State essentially just threw away.
Yeah, and again, it's Jackson Arnold, a lot of flashes, right? And I think that's sort of been the story with him in his fairly limited-ish time. And he hasn't. It's really only been a year and one game. He started the bowl game last year, and he got benched at one point. And once he came back in, he did look a little bit better. And he didn't look bad against Ole Miss. I think the athleticism is a little bit sneaky there. He's a nice athlete, and he's got a nice arm.
Alabama turned him into Cam Newton.
No, I know he looked like the best quarterback in the country in that game. But it's again it's the consistency, and you would expect more consistency from a guy who has been in the pro. I know he didn't play a ton last year, but he's been in the program. He played in the bowl game. You thought he got the mistakes out of the way in that bowl game. I think he threw like 3 picks in the Alamo Bowl or whichever bowl game it was, and you thought you'd have a clean slate. And I know their offensive coordinator situation was kind of messy this year. The offense was just kind of a mess this year, but the consistency is definitely been lacking with Arnold. But, who knows? Maybe a fresh start's what he needs.
Thanks for checking out the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. When we come back, we will turn our attention to Chris Beard and the Ole Miss basketball team as they're getting ready. I guess the next big game will be against the Memphis Tigers on the schedule. We'll talk about what's coming up in the non-conference and the scheduling and looking towards SEC play in a minute. So just stick around for that. There's nothing like the energy of being at a live game, the roar of the crowd, the sound of the sneakers squeaking on the court, and even spotting a few celebrities in the stand. I remember going to an NBA game a couple of years back. I think it was the Mavericks and the Timberwolves, and the electricity in that arena was unforgettable. You cannot replicate watching that from your couch. This year, I'm looking forward to catching more games live, heading over to Orlando and seeing which NBA teams are coming in there. And it should be really cool. And Game Time makes it easier than ever with their new Game Time Picks feature. Whether it's basketball, concerts, or theater, Game Time helps you find the best deals on great seats without the hassle of endless scrolling. I hopped on the app, checked out the tickets for an upcoming game, and the Game Time Picks app made it a breeze to find a super deal with amazing seats. Plus, the app showed me panoramic views so I could pick the perfect spot. No guesswork, no surprises. I see exactly what I'll pay for up front with no hidden fees at checkout. And what I love about Game Time is their lowest price guarantee. If I find a better deal, Game Time is going to credit me 110% of the difference. And with event cancellation protection, your tickets are covered if plans change. It is the most flexible ticketing app I have ever used. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Again, that's code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE, all one word, for $20 off that first purchase. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. And also, get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel. That's America's #1 sports book, by the way, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. Every college football playoff game is featuring a home team that's favored by more than a touchdown. And I might be crazy, but Tennessee might be more built for cold weather than Ohio State. That might be the upset to watch for. And if you think about it, the pre-sale for tickets in that game, Tennessee fans got the offer code leaked and bought thousands of seats inside the Horseshoe. They might checkerboard that thing out for all we know. The FanDuel Sportsbook gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place those bets. Just visit FanDuel.com today to join. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if that first $5 bet wins. That is FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And I don't know if you heard me, Michael, but yes, there was a pre-sale code of the Ohio State Buckeyes that got leaked, got wind to Tennessee fans, and Tennessee fans bought thousands of seats inside the Horseshoe. And should this surprise anybody with Ross Bjork being in charge of the athletic department at Ohio State?
Yeah, it's never a good sign of where things are when Ross Bjork, a couple weeks or like 8 days before the playoff, has to come out and say Ryan Day is safe. It's never good. You're in the playoff and you've got to guard your head coach from that sort of situation. I do agree with you that Tennessee is kind of a cold weather team though, which is weird because they play great defense and they run the hell out of the ball.
Yeah, absolutely. And you look at it, the Chip Kelly stuff that they do at Ohio State's not really made for December weather. Tennessee's kind of tailor-made. They're thinking about Josh Heupel and everything, and it's like, oh, they throw the ball around the yard. No, Tennessee is a running team, and Dylan Sampson is going to be a hoss, and they're going to play defense. It's going to be a low-scoring game, and I'm going to tell you that Tennessee wants it to be snowing in Columbus.
Yeah, no, and I know that Ohio State's taken a lot of pride in running the ball these last few years, and they've got some good running backs. We remember one of them. We won't get into that, but I mean, Sampson has been incredible. I mean, he's got 1,500 yards and 20-something touchdowns. I know a lot of people had really high expectations for Nico this year, and he was a little bit up and down. But that offense has been completely running based. It's really, I think it's a testament to Heupel of how he's completely changed this team's identity from this, wide open passing game that we remember with Hendon Hooker just a couple years ago to a defense first running the ball team. I think that says a lot about him.
Yeah, and honestly, it's a credit for Josh Heupel because it was a lot of what Lane Kiffin needed to do this year. The realizing fairly early on that the defense is going to be the strength of the team and you need to play to it. Heupel was willing to do it. He ended up making the playoffs. Lane Kiffin, it bit him against LSU, against Kentucky, and against Florida, making decisions that didn't necessarily protect that defense, and Ole Miss is in the Gator Bowl and not in the playoffs.
Yeah, I know. There were so many times, like the Georgia game, when you put he kicked the field goals and he puts the game in the hands of this defense. And there were a few times this year where he said it, and we were like, man, like what a big step for Lane, because you never thought he'd say it. And then there's just those couple of moments where the instinct kicks in, and that's when you get those 3 blemishes.
Yep, and it just bites you. It kind of is what it is. Let's change the subject a little bit. And Ole Miss has a pretty good little basketball team this year, and they're getting a lot of love on the national circuit right now. The home schedule and the non-conference games, nothing to really sneeze at. I think the next big game that they'll have is December 28th against the Memphis Tigers. Memphis lost to Arkansas State, so that's definitely a winnable game for Ole Miss looking at it. What do you think about the lead into SEC play? Because SEC play was basically every game that you win is a quad 1 win. That's what SEC basketball is this year. So it's about making it through this non-conference as clean as you can.
Yeah, and I mean that's what they did last year, right? They started 13-0, 12, whatever it was, and then obviously the SEC is a little bit different than those non-conference games. And speaking of Memphis, yeah, I never know what Memphis team you're going to get because again, they beat UConn in Maui, and they won that invitational, and then they lost to Arkansas State. It was Arkansas State's like first ranked win in I don't remember how many years it was, so they're a little bit uneven, but always a fun matchup. But yeah, I think that for this year, I think like last year with the non-conference schedule, I think we were all trying to figure out like how good is this team because we didn't know much about that team. We hadn't seen an Ole Miss Chris Beard team. There's a whole new cast of players, and there's a new cast of characters now, but we know what this team wants to be, what Chris Beard wants to do. I think now it's just fine-tuning and making sure that, yeah, you of course want to win these non-conference games and go in as unscathed as you can. But at the same time, it doesn't do you any good if you didn't learn anything from the games you played. So I think a lot of it's going to be, figuring out the rotations and, which guys can you count on in situations in SEC play. And then when you get there, I think that they are going to be in a better place than they were last year just because, one, he's been here a year. A lot of guys have been in the system. But I also think that just from a roster standpoint, they are built better for an SEC schedule than they were last year.
And the football schedule for 2025 got released. Like I said, the schedule sets up pretty nice for Ole Miss. I mean, Ole Miss probably couldn't ask for better. They don't leave the state of Mississippi in November, for instance. So it's a pretty good thing. But the schedule release was actually a bad thing who are against playing Southern Miss in football if you're an Ole Miss fan, because Arkansas is breaking their long-standing rule, and they are actually playing Arkansas State, which was the last holdout of teams that are being willing to play these smaller teams within their home state. So everybody else is now doing it with the exception of Alabama and Ole Miss. And this could be a precursor for an eventual game between Ole Miss and Southern Miss, I think. And Mississippi State actually opens up next season at Southern Miss.
Yeah, Southern Miss just hired a nice coach too. I like Charles Huff. He's done a really nice job. That was I don't know if I understand the move from his perspective, but it's a hell of a hire.
He got ran off at Marshall.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. It was a situation that he kept asking for his contract to be extended, and they wouldn't do it, and it just expired. And he just like, okay, well, if you're going to do that. But it's one of those situations where a coach wins the conference championship, the number one team in the conference, and goes to the last place team to do that. I'm interested because I think the entire Marshall football team entered the transfer portal.
It seems like
it, yeah, something like that. So I would imagine that Southern Miss has a chance to go pretty high, worst to first. That seems to be something that they could potentially do. And Charles Huff, if he's smart, I do not know if he will do this. He needs to have an attitude real similar to what Deion Sanders did his first year at Colorado, to where, you need to bring in as many people as you can get because, Will Hall and those guys, they weren't the dudes.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason they lost as many games as they did. I know coaching is important, but talent matters, and it was pretty clear that team did not have the caliber of player it needed. It's going to take a few years, but roster overhaul, do what you got to do, and I think he's proven he's a good coach. I mean, again, he literally just won the conference championship game, and now he's got some work ahead of him, but I think he's going to do a good job.
Last Mississippi school to get a Florida State backup quarterback at Southern Miss. So
he entered the portal too, yeah. Rodemaker.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. So we'll see exactly how that goes. Anyway, thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Michael Katz from the Northeast Mississippi Tupelo Daily Journal. What have you got going on this week, man?
We got some basketball going on Saturday. Obviously, I think they're in Biloxi. They're playing Southern Miss. Mm-hmm. It's going to be Biloxi is always an interesting place to play. But we've got some. I think I'm gonna have some stuff. Some Gator Bowl preview stuff coming up, some schedule analysis again, since we know the dates and all that kind of stuff. I think the bye weeks are set up at kind of weird times for them this year. I think the first one's 5 weeks in, and then the next one they play another 6 games before their second bye, right before the Egg Bowl. So that's kind of interesting. But like you said, I think you knew where the teams were going to be, but I think that it lines up as good as it could for them. And Morgan, a big story for the Gator Bowl, hopefully about a quarterback who is deciding to play one more time. So
do you want to hear my conspiracy theory about the schedule release?
Yes.
With Ole Miss and State having bye weeks the week before, the Egg Bowl is going back to Thanksgiving.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and whenever they were the 2 SEC teams that got a bye week the week before, is like, oh yeah, they've heard Lane and everybody complaining about the short turnaround. Yeah, that kind of feels like a conspiracy theory that might be something.
Man, it was so nice having Thanksgiving this year too.
Yeah, and maybe ABC and not ESPN is going to broadcast the Thanksgiving game, and then they do 2 games on Friday, and they just like stretch it out, because like South Carolina and Clemson, that's going to be a home game. That's an ABC game. Florida and Florida State is going to be in Gainesville. Obviously, Alabama, Auburn, Georgia Tech. Although Georgia Tech is going to be that would be the ESPN candidate. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there. Oklahoma's supposed to be a little bit better. I think they're trying to go from Thursday until Saturday that day to where they just bank all that time.
Man, now that does make a lot of sense. I'm going to follow the breadcrumbs. I like where this is going.
Yeah, we'll see exactly how it goes. Anyway, thank you, Michael, for joining us. We'll talk to you next week, bud.
Thanks, man.